Welcome to the Freedom School, an opportunity to learn about history-bending campaigns and initiatives from across the globe. We are inspired by what the Freedom Schools meant during the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, a place for alternative learning for African Americans, a safe space to discover suppressed stories of courage under oppression, the wisdom of culture, and the determination of many to make the impossible seem inevitable. This Freedom School is part of Spadework, a program that seeks to nurture and develop a new generation of organizers committed to those same principles. Learning about the historical context of these important campaigns and movement initiatives allows us to reflect more deeply about our own current challenges. Inquiring and learning is part of the organizer's Spadework. Organizers are inspired by the people we meet and the stories we share with each other. We also know that this journey never ends, and along the way we find joy and satisfaction in practicing the proven organizing adage. Listen with an open heart to the lessons others have learned and apply what you think makes sense. Then reflect, rinse, repeat. If you are inspired by what you hear, or if you want to support the development of a new generation of organizers through Spadework, then consider making a small contribution to keep this going. Go to www.spadework.school/donate right now, or simply click on the link on the chat screen. Enjoy your time together. Adelante.
Thank you, Ale, for getting us set up. Good morning, good afternoon, it's evening here. My name is Alex Muhammad, born and raised in Chicago, and I currently work as the political training director for the Mass Liberation Project. And in this space, I'll be serving as co-host for the Freedom School. Freedom School is also connected to Spadework, which we recently launched. Spadework is an 8-month intensive campaign development and training support cohort for organizations and organizers who are on the front lines responding to systemic racism. And I'm super excited to be here. Today is the 6th Freedom School session, and I'll pass it over to Larry, my co-host, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're coming to you from a bunch of different time zones today. So my name is Larry Solomon. I teach in the Department of Race and Resistance Studies at San Francisco State University in the College of Ethnic Studies, the historic College of Ethnic Studies. I'm a longtime faculty member, but also a longtime trainer in what is generally called movement history. And so Alex told you a little bit about what Spadework does, and Freedom School is a part of this program. Freedom School's kind of mission and spirit is to connect today's generation of organizers with movements from yesteryear, from sometimes as recently as a few years ago to struggles that took place decades ago. And so we're really happy to bring this series to you and to bring these stories to you. We talk a lot about history. Today is in the United States, a grim anniversary, the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. And, we're getting better, I think, as a society telling the truth about our history. But one thing we don't often tell is the history of movement, the history of organizing, the history of struggle against those oppressive forces. And so that's part of what we're doing here today. And in fact, we're really kind of excited to have a really great session for us today. So I'll let Alex introduce that in a second. But before we get into that, just a few program notes. We are live streaming on YouTube. YouTube is also the place where all of our episodes are living. So we have 5 previous episodes. We'll have 10 total. So you can go to our YouTube channel and check that out. Like I said, we're currently live streaming. In a minute, we will begin our main presentation and meet our very special guest presenters. But I wanted to also let you know that in the second hour of our session today, we will devote a pretty good portion of it to your questions, your insights and your questions. So please feel free to use the chat function. We have a great team here at Freedom School who will collect those questions, and we'll try to do our best to give them the light of day. We've also asked a couple of respondents in the Spadework program to also share some reflections and questions for our guests. And before we close today's session, we will preview next week's session, week 7, and other upcoming sessions. So I'm going to throw it back to Alex, who will introduce our presenter. Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So Joel Rocamora is joining us today from Malani, Philippines. Joel is a leader in the anti-dictatorship movement and also former director of the Institute for Popular Democracy. Joel is also one of the founders of the left political party called Akbanyan, and even did a short stint as a cabinet member in the Aquino administration as the secretary of the National Anti-Poverty Commission. So thank you so much for joining us, Joel. Just to check in, how are you? Where are you joining us from today?
Okay, good. I guess for you, good evening. For others, good afternoon. I'm connecting with you in Manila, Philippines. And it's early morning here. So we're sort of cutting across time zones all over the world. And I'm happy to contribute to this session as best as I can.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Thanks for being here. And I know it's super early where you are, right? In the Philippines?
Not too early for old fogies like me. 7 o'clock in the morning is okay.
Gotcha. That's really early for me. Can you, before I pass it to Larry really quickly, Joel, can you tell us a little bit about the type of work that you're up to today?
Okay. I continue to be active in our left political party, Akbayan, helping with ideological work, helping with taking positions on current issues, and most important, helping with local organizing work. So that's one. The other is I'm also executive director of the Institute for Popular Democracy, which I should warn you does not mean we're popular. We use popular in the Latino sense of popular. So for the people, we do research for social movements. So enough things to do for an 80-year-old.
Larry?
Okay, well, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Joel, for joining us. We really appreciate you. And 7 o'clock in the morning is earlier than I've been up in years, so my respect to you. If I had a hat, I would take it off. But thank you again for joining us. I want to remind people again that that chat function is going to be available, and we'd love to see your questions and insights. We'll have a series of really good questions, in the second half of the session. We'll also be showing a film clip today and introducing our filmmaker later in the session. I think Joel will do that. But without further delay, I want to have our main guest now take us back to a historic struggle against development and displacement in the Philippines during the years of martial law in the 1970s. The director of the Institute for Popular Democracy in the Philippines, among other titles. Our very special guest, Joel Rocamora. Joel, you have the floor. All yours.
Thank you, Larry. We have to go back almost half a century to this case study that we have chosen. But it's a perfect case study, one that offers a lot of lessons. Firstly, bare bones, it was a struggle against the plan of the Marcos dictatorship and the World Bank to build 4 dams and inundate 100,000 people, force these people to leave their farms. And so the struggle was, how should I put it, elemental, okay? And what I want to do is to introduce how the struggle won, because indeed it won by 1982, a couple of years after it was it was started. The World Bank pulled out its support for the project, and the project didn't see light of day at that time. So what I think for our purposes, what is important is to look at the elements in this struggle. To start with, I think the most important is that this was a struggle by tribal people, by indigenous people, using their community resources and their traditions to fight against this, 21st century project. The second is, at some point, it got caught up in a nationwide struggle of the National Democratic Front and the New People's Army against the Marcos dictatorship. So these are the key elements. And lastly, and in a way, this is where your work comes in. It succeeded because we were able to develop a campaign against the project that went from the Cordillera, where this was, to San Francisco. It went all over the world, and in the end, what stopped it was the campaign and the fact that there was so much publicity against it all over the world. Back a little bit. The Cordillera is a range, it's a mountain range starting in the north of Manila in the island of Luzon and stretching south about 250 miles. And the people of the Cordillera, the Igorot, managed to fend off the Spanish and the American colonial powers, and after independence managed to work up, how should I put it, their independence and their ability to maintain their traditions. One thing that most studies of what happened there don't point out is what the project would have inundated would have been rice terraces built over the course of a couple thousand years. So these are rice terraces built on mountains and carved out of mountains. So it's one of the wonders of the world. So that's one. The other is that like a lot of indigenous societies, they honor their ancestors, linking up with their past through their ancestors is very important. And in Igorot country, they don't bury their dead underground. They put them up in caves outside, so that I mean, it's not just that the cemeteries would be inundated. The actual bodies of their ancestors would be flooded. So you can imagine the kind of horror, the kind of threat to not just their livelihood, the rice terraces, but to their very culture. Just last point. In these areas, their traditional community organizations have remained strong, and they also have traditional means of linking up village level community organizations with village level community organizations throughout the area. So if some people may say that it's the New People's Army that stopped the project, I think it was the strength of tradition in these countries that stopped the project. Is that enough? Should I say more? Hello?
Yeah, Joel, I would love to hear more about the contours of the struggle itself. And I appreciate you setting up the traditional village organizations, community organizations, contrasting them maybe to outside groups or the National People's Army. I'm wondering though, if you can talk about how that struggle sort of emerged, evolved. What were some of the issues in the fight itself, and how long it went on, and what were some of the other challenges?
The initial struggle was really the local people saying, we don't want these dams. We don't want our rice terraces flooded. And they used traditional means. For example, in Igorot culture, if women go up to you in a demonstration without their clothes on, okay, that's a terrible insult, and they did that several times to prevent local people from cooperating in the project, local people from working with the teams that were preparing the dam. So, I mean, to me, that's really the core. Okay. The second is, while the New People's Army played a role in the struggle, it's only in the Cordillera where the National Democratic Front allowed the formation of a local, they called it Cordillera People's Democratic Front, a separate front with their own leadership that was able to assert itself in this national organization. What were the issues? The issues had to do with, well, for example, at one point later in the struggle, the leader of the struggle, Makliing Dulag, was murdered, was killed in his house, and that, you know, got everybody on board. That got everybody really worked up, and in many ways, that was one of the what do you call this? That was one of the sort of main mistakes of of the Marcos dictatorship. Okay, now the struggle occurred almost half a century ago, but recently it continues to reverberate in Philippine politics, and especially in that area. The local people had constructed a memorial to Macleang Dulag and two other leaders of the struggle by the roadside in the mountain road going up to Baguio, the summer capital of the Philippines. And the police tried to get a judge to get the memorial dismantled because local people saw it as an anti-government memorial. The judge refused. So what the police did is, in the middle of the night, masked men tore it down. They couldn't do it legally, so they did it illegally. Less than a month later, the local people set it up again. And so now it's there. And not only that, in Manila, a similar memorial has been set up only in the last few weeks. So that struggle continues to reverberate through 50 years of history.
Thank you for that. I'm going to throw it over to Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel. I think now feels like a good time for us to hop into the video that you want us to share. And then when we come out of that, I think we'll ask both you, Joel, and Scott, who is joining us, who created the film, to help kind of synthesize what we watched, and then we can jump into the conversation. So we'll do that. So Matt, are you able to start?
Philippines now. Las Filipinas están en proceso de desarrollo. Ese desarrollo es para industrializar al país.
The Philippines are in a process of development to impose the country. Unfortunately, the planners are only thinking of energy without thinking of what it would be used for. That technology in reality does not cover the necessities of the country.
Not indigenous to the Philippines. And secondly, they do not really meet the actual needs of the people of the Philippines.
Not only in
No solamente
not only are there the activities related to developing energy, but in general, when progress is made, any economic activity to reach high levels needs to pay, has social costs.
that it entails social costs.
For us, the social costs of development are relocation. What would it mean to leave our homes? We need to unbury the bones of our ancestors and deliver them to where we're transported to. But the bones are part of the land. If without the spirit of our ancestors, what would be of them? What would be of us?
We were threatened with imprisonment.
Los militares nos amenazaron con encarcelamiento.
They threatened us with imprisonment because
we refused to vacate. They were calling us for relocation.
In one of the rivers, there were dams built. In 1972, in Magat, the homes and were inundated. We saw many families without desire to live, still crying. The government sold them homes, but with high mortgages. The government sold them land, but they were non-productive lands. They didn't even have wood to cook. When they were relocated, they took even the last piece of wood that they could find.
En el proyecto del río Chico
In
planean
the
construir una serie de
Chico
presas para producir
River
electricidad
project,
sin
they
pensar en
wanted
lo que le
to
sucederá a los
build
nativos
a
filipinos
series of
que han
dams
vivido en estas tierras
to
por
produce
miles de
electricity
años.
without thinking of
Ellos
the
quieren
impact of
surtir de
Filipinos
energía,
that have been
especialmente las
lived here.
ciudades a costa
They
del sacrificio de los
want
filipinos nativos.
to provide energy at the cost of the people that live here.
Cada grupo tiene que estar
Each
dispuesto a
group
algún
has to be
sacrificio para el
willing
beneficio de la
to
sociedad entera.
sacrifice some sort of sacrifice for the benefit of the whole society. The government said that Dinamarca would be a model relocation or resettlement, but people were highly indebted. They asked the government for better compensation for their lands, but their children are still going hungry.
Essentially, the
La
opposition
oposición de los Kalinga y los Bontoc a la
The
construcción de las represas se ha
opposition
vuelto muy
to the
apasionada,
construction
porque
of the
la gente
dams
entiende que
has
la
been
construcción de
impassioned
estas
because
represas
people think that
significaría
the building
el
of these dams
asentamiento,
would mean
significaría la virtual desaparición
relocation
de
or
nuestras
resettlement.
tierras.
It
Y no
would be
solamente eso,
losing their
sino
lands, not
también la
only that,
muerte de una
but
cultura.
also the death of a
And
culture.
the depth of a culture. The people have been made aware.
La gente se ha
The people
concientizado
have been
a
made
través de un
aware
proceso de observación
through
y
an observation
descubrimiento de las
process
experiencias
and
pasadas, que los
discovering
proyectos de
of a
reasentamiento
past
del
experience
gobierno
that a
siempre
resettlement or
han sido
relocation
muy
projects by a government
Was
always
led
have costs.
to misery.
Nos quitan nuestra tierra. No
If
puedo
they
ni
take
siquiera
our land,
imaginar
I
cómo
can't even
podríamos-
imagine
cómo
how we
podríamos
can
desarrollarnos como pueblo.
develop ourselves as a people. So then what are we doing here? Nothing.
La gente está sufriendo.
People are suffering, and that is why we're looking for new alternatives to respond to new needs. None of these alternatives is what the new People's Army is offering, that has a program according to the vital needs of our people. And we love the program, and we are sympathizers and members of it.
And so, how to organize the people?
¿Cómo organizar a la gente? Es un
And so how
problema
do we
particular
organize
aquí en la
people is
cordillera,
a particular
porque
problem
estamos
here in the
divididos en
Cordillera,
contrariando
because
nuestros
we
propios
are
intereses.
going against our own interests.
Pero ahora, todas las
But
tierras
now,
comunales están
all of
amenazadas
the
por el
communal
Estado.
lands are
Y tenemos que
threatened by the
unificarnos
state, and
para
we have to
sintetizar y
unite
concretizar
to be able to
la oposición
synthesize and
aislada de la gente,
concretize the
para que la gente
opposition
pueda
of the
unir
people, so that
construir
people
una
can
mayor
unite
fortaleza,
and
construir
build
una
a
mayor
bigger
unidad.
strength, a
The
bigger
militant
unity.
position of the people, so that it could be united or organized to a bigger unity for a bigger strength.
Cuanto más se fortalece
And
el pueblo,
so,
los militares
as
envían más
well,
tropas.
strength grows, military of the people grows, more military
El abuso y la
presence is
represión de los
incremented.
militares
Uh,
ha endurecido
the
la oposición
repression
a
of the
tal
military
punto
has
que los indígenas
hardened the
nativos
opposition
sentimos
to
que
the
el
point
gobierno
of that
vino aquí
indigenous
solo para
people
hacer nuestras vidas más y más
they
deprimidas.
think that the government exists only to make our lives more precarious
More oppressive.
or oppressive.
Uno de nuestros líderes,
One of our
Hakeem
leaders
Dulac, dijo,
Esos que necesitan
said,
electricidad no piensan en la gente
those that
destruida
need
por el estrés.
electricity don't
¿Es acaso la
think
necesidad
of
de
the
electricidad
people.
suficiente razón para nuestra muerte?
This need for electricity sufficient of a reason for our death?
la energía de las represas del río
The
Chico
energy of the dams
serviría a fábricas y
would
minas. Pero ¿quién se beneficia realmente con esto?
work for factories, but who is benefited by this?
We are for development. Nosotros estamos a favor del
We are
desarrollo,
for
pero siempre
development,
tenemos que
but
preguntar
we
desarrollo
always
para
have to
quién.
ask development for
En el
whom?
proceso del desarrollo,
Because
aunque
in the
podamos tener
process of
tecnología avanzada,
development
quien sufre es el
and
pueblo.
access for high tech,
Sacrifice in exchange for advanced
who
technology.
is sacrificing?
Miles de Igoros,
Thousands of Igor,
esposos,
our
nuestros hijos
husbands,
trabajan en
our
minas de
children
oro y
work
cobre
in
que pertenecen a
gold
compañías
and copper
extranjeras.
mines that belong to foreign companies.
El trabajo es sacrificado y el salario no alcanza para comer.
The sacrifice and the work is not
Las
enough.
minas son viejas e inseguras.
The mines
Cuando no nos matan los accidentes,
are super
nos matan
insecure
las
when the
enfermedades.
accidents don't kill us.
Tenemos los
The
pulmones llenos
illness
de tierra,
kills us.
los ojos
Our
llenos de
lungs
sudor.
are full of dust.
En toda la cordillera, las compañías
Throughout the
están
cordillera, the
abriendo nuevas
companies
minas.
are opening
Ellos
new mines,
destrozan nuestros paisajes.
and they're destroying
Químicos
our
y desechos
landscape.
envenenan nuestras aguas.
Chemicals and
Un monstruo gigante está devorando
poison our
nuestras
waters.
tierras.
The smoke is devouring our lands.
Medio millón de hectáreas
Half
de
a
nuestras
million of
forestras ancestrales fueron tomadas por una
acres
corporación
were
llamada
taken by a
Celofin.
corporation
Gente de
named
5
Cellophane.
provincias perderá su sustento cuando las montañas sean
When the
arrasadas.
mountains are taken from us.
Celofil tenía que procesar la madera,
Cellophane
hacer
needed to
papel y
process the
fibra,
wood, make
pero las
paper,
fábricas fracasaron.
fiber,
Estaban mal
but the
diseñadas y mal
factories failed.
construidas.
They were poorly
Miles de
designed and
toneladas
poorly
de madera
built.
se echaron a
Thousands
perder, y
of
Celofil ahora exporta
tons
madera en
of
bruto.
work of wood were
Cuando protestamos, ellos nos llamaron
or
subversivos. Cientos de
when we
personas
protested,
fueron
they called us
maltratadas y
subversive.
encarceladas.
Hundreds of people
Villas
were
enteras fueron forzadas a
mistreated
abandonar
and
sus cultivos y
incarcerated.
sus hogares.
They were forced to leave their lands and their homes.
Ni siquiera nuestros animales pueden circular
Not even
libremente,
our animals
porque ellos
can
dicen que la tierra ya no es
roam
nuestra.
freely because they
No
say
podemos
that the land
libremente
is no
cortar
longer
leña,
us.
ni
We
siquiera
can't
para
simply
cocinar,
cut wood, not
mucho
even
menos para
not
construir
even to
nuevas
cook,
casas.
much less to
get
build new
license,
homes.
we have to pay for the wood, we have to pay for the tree. We could not even get firewood freely anymore because we have to get license.
1972, in this world
Las multinacionales necesitan a los militares para
The multinational, they need the military to protect the land. Those companies become richer and richer when the poor become poorer and poorer.
Ya hemos llegado al límite.
We have reached our limit. We no longer have patience. We no longer have time. We've always been warriors. Now the government has forced us to take arms again.
The main work of the NPA,
El trabajo principal del nuevo ejército
The main
popular
work of
es
the
el político.
NPA is political.
Queremos desarrollar nuestra
We
capacidad
want to
de
develop our
confrontación con el
capacity
pueblo
of
en las
concentration
situaciones
with the
concretas de
people
vida diaria,
in
en
concrete
referencia a la
situations of their daily
situación
life,
no
in,
solamente de la cordillera,
as
sino de las
in
Filipinas
reference
en
to
general.
not only the Cordillera,
situation.
but the Philippines in general.
Sinamit talon at gamit naman nila si taksakit bueno man ilan no kasanong padur hasta si masakit nan. Ada dati imperialista. Ito ada tuy di estado nga kuna tayo niya. Estado ti aput daga. Dan burgis comprador sistema da ito.
Toda la gente de la cordillera
All
se
of the
unió
people
contra
at the
las empresas
Cordillera
de Río Chico.
united
En
against the
1982,
river dam.
nuestros
In
ataques obligaron
1962,
al
our
gobierno a parar
attacks
las
forced
construcciones.
the government to stop the construction.
Controversy related to the Chico River Dam project.
La controversia acerca del río
The
Chico persuadió al
controversy
gobierno
around
de
the River
revisar
Dam
sus planes
project,
y en vez de proceder forzosamente y sin tener en cuenta
instead of
las
proceeding
opiniones de las
forcefully
interesadas,
without taking
el
into
gobierno
account the
decidió
affected
posponer la
community,
construcción
the
de la
government
represa.
decided to postpone
A pesar
the
de que era
building
un
of the
proyecto
river
ideal
dams,
desde el punto de vista
despite the
técnico.
fact that on their point of view, it was an ideal project.
From a technical point of view.
La isla de Samar es la
The
tercera
island
más
of
grande de
Samar
las
was the
Filipinas,
third
muy rica en
largest
recursos
island in the
naturales,
Philippines,
pero
very
la
rich
mayoría
in
de la
natural
gente es muy
resources.
pobre.
But the majority of
Por eso nos
people,
preguntamos, ¿por qué
this
esto
is
es
why we
así?
ask, why is this
Y
like
es que
so?
las multinacionales explotan
And
todas
it's
las
because the
riquezas.
multinational corporations exploit all
Vimos
of
la
the resources.
injusticia de todo esto
We
y
see
no
the
podíamos
injustice of
cerrar
all
los
of these,
ojos.
and we couldn't stay put. In other parts of our country, we see that half of the crops are produced for exporting. Each year, more than $2,000 million of crops are exported, and 2/3 of our population suffers hunger. This place is super rich by nature. There's wood, fish, coconut, corn, and the multinational look for the military to protect their business.
Thank you so much, both Joel and Scott, for sharing this with us. I want to actually bring Scott in too. Thanks for joining us. If you could just introduce yourself really quickly, and then maybe give us a little bit more context about this film. And then Joel, I would love for you to also add some more context to what we just watched.
Okay. I met Joel when we were entering graduate school at Cornell in 1964. That's what, 57 years ago? And we stayed in touch. Not very close touch, but I received a message from him 1981, I believe, that was essentially, he knew I was making documentary films based in Mexico, where I've been for over 50 years. And the message was, we need a film. And I understood. And I signed up with my equipment, and I recruited a film sound man, Ismael Saavedra from Bolivia, and this was a team effort. It was actually quite well planned, maybe a year in advance, with two Americans, Charlie Drucker, an anthropologist who had done field work with the Bontoc people in Sadanga village, where we spent some time, and Jeff Chester. And so they did some arrangements, put in some money, and I put in my equipment, 16 millimeter equipment, audio. And we went by, Ismail and I stopped in Los Angeles and bought the film, Fuji Negative, and off we went to Manila, where Joel had made arrangements for us to be picked up at the door, literally at the front door of the Manila airport. And Ismail and I arrived 2 weeks later because Jeff and Charlie arranged for press credentials for all four of us, which came in handy later because we were essentially busted by the counterinsurgency colonel, but that's another story. So, and 2 days later, we were in the highlands in Cordillera. It spent 2 months in the Philippines, with mostly in the Cordillera, in Manila at a safe house, and in Mindanao for a week, staying in I think they were Irish Fathers convent in Davao City. And we never saw the material. I was the camera person, on everything that's not stock footage, like Ronald Reagan and Marcos and their 21 gun salute, of course. So it turns out, and I never saw any rushes because I came back to Mexico with Ismael, who returned to California and edited with with Charlie and Jeff, and I was able to stay to be at the mix in the presentation at Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley. That was 1982, and so the film was distributed on video. I understand Joel can tell us more about that. And a film, Joel, by the way, after the mix and the first print came out, Joel said, by the way, would you take it to the Cubans, to Fidel? Well, you can't turn that down, right? It's an opportunity. So the Spanish print was made, well, essentially as a political gesture between the National Democratic Front and the Cubans, and a copy for myself. And so uh, a, a new print I took to the film festival in Havana. That would have been December of '83. And it was programmed on the first day, the opening day of the festival, with a lot of other nice films. It's one of the only time in my life where my work was shown the way you would like to see it, on the big screen and a nice sound system in a big theater. The Cubans obviously liked it. Nothing was said to me, wondering who is this gringo bringing this film from the Philippines. And of course, I understood that. They bought the print for the lab replacement cost and pulled out the catalog of New York lab, and I was pleased and I went back the next year to the film festival because I missed the opportunity to say some words to Fidel, which was part of the compromiso. And I was able to do that at the reception. And so mission accomplished, film made, film taken to Havana, words exchanged with the primer comandante, and that's sort of the end of my participation in this project.
Thank you so much for sharing, Scott. And thanks for joining the conversation. Joel, can you also add some context to the film and to the campaign that will help support us like moving into conversation around the specific campaign?
Well, I mean, to start with, that was almost half a century ago, so a lot of the details have receded. My memory is receding faster than my hairline. But the point is that the film, although it came towards the end of the campaign, was perfect in the sense that it gave brought together image, sound, people. I mean, a lot of the people that are shown there, also those people have passed away. So I think the part I wish we could still contact some key people, but I think one of the major reasons why the campaign succeeded is the work that was done in Washington, D.C. A group that was called the Friends of the Filipino People, made up of former missionaries and other Americans who spent some time in the Philippines and sympathized with the anti-dictatorship struggle, launched a campaign within the World Bank. I mean, a book was even published on the role of the World Bank in the Philippines, the result of stolen documents from within the World Bank itself. But it's hard to work out all the details. But I think what's important to emphasize is a campaign, firstly, of course, needs people, but as it were, the weapons of public campaigns, like the campaign against the Chico River Dam, the film was like the howitzer, the heavy weaponry of the campaign. In where I worked, the Southeast Asia Resource Center, we also produced an issue of the Southeast Asia Chronicle, not just on the struggle of the Igorots against the Chico River Dam, but the struggle of indigenous people in different parts of the Philippines. So I can't say, I mean, we contributed crucial weapons in the campaign, but the campaign was really run by the anti-dictatorship movement. And what we did was to contribute to it. Back to you, Alex.
Got you. Thank you, Joel. I'm actually going to pass it over to Larry to walk us through how we'll use the rest of the time.
Thank you, Alex. So we have some questions already that have emerged. I appreciate Scott and Joel kind of synthesizing that, talking kind of more in broad strokes about what that particular era offers us today. I'm just kind of mindful of a couple of questions around that particular anti-dictatorship movement was part of a larger global trend in the 20th century of national liberation movements in the so-called global South. And Joel kind of made reference to the fact that a lot of movement people, both in the film and we know generally speaking from that era, are no longer with us. They've passed on. How should we best remember their contributions? How should we best remember this particular moment of struggle in the national liberation context? Joel, the question is to you.
The National Democratic Front, after more than 50 years of struggle, still hasn't won. What I've been pushing for the last year or so is for the front to go ahead and agree to a political settlement, to a peace process. But the story that I told earlier about this memorial, this monument, is a perfect example of the way that struggle of half a century ago reverberates to the present. I mean, the struggle to maintain that memorial and to rebuild it after it was destroyed by the police, and then the way in which that struggle over the monument then spilled over to Manila, where they are building a replica of that memorial, is a perfect example of the way in which old struggles don't die. They remain in the memory of people. I haven't kept track of what's happening in the Cordillera, but I imagine that that is very much a part of the, as it were, the treasure chest of the Igorot people that struggle, something which they treasure. So in that sense, yes, it's still relevant.
It's such an important question, just such an important point about how history gets passed on, and particular histories that don't become mainstream or that get fought by the mainstream, passed on in local communities. I have a quick question about something we saw in the clip, and forgive me if I misinterpreted this, but it looked like, I don't know if they were MPA folks or who were doing some kind of popular education, political education with the people. Can you talk about how receptive people in the village were, from your observations there, to some of those education models, those kind of radicalizing education models? Or did they even need to be radicalized in that sense?
As I suggested earlier, the National Democratic Front in the Cordillera was, I wouldn't say unique, but was allowed to develop in a way that in other areas, the National Democratic Front did not develop. For example, in Igorot society, there are certain families that play major roles, not because they're big landlords or rich merchants, but because in their traditions, these families are given a lot of importance. For example, one of the people shown there was Claver, Bishop Claver, and so what is important to understand is that the struggle in the Cordillera was firmly rooted in the culture and traditions of the people themselves. So, looking at the film clip, what the guy was illustrating was the organizational structure of probably the New People's Army Front Committee and what the various units in the organization are. But I mean, that was only part of the story, a small part of the story. The more important part are, for example, are something that they call the Bordong. The Bordong is a village assembly, and which is very, very democratic. And then they had inter-Bordong meetings. So it's the situation in the Cordillera in that sense is quite unique. I don't know of any other place where that exists. There are indigenous people in Mindanao, the Lumad, but I don't think they have been able to maintain the kinds of traditional political structures that the Igorots have been able to maintain. But it also became part of a national struggle. As I pointed out, the dams were stopped not just because of what the local people did, most importantly, because of what the local people did, but also campaigns against the dam in the rest of the Philippines and then abroad, most importantly in Washington, D.C. against the World Bank, to persuade the World Bank to give up the project.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question, which was about the impact that and the model that struggle sort of set for other similar campaigns around the world against structural adjustment policies, and not specifically against the World Bank per se, but against local governments and in those places where movements were successful. Do you feel like this struggle had that kind of impact beyond the Philippines?
I'm not sure about beyond the Philippines, but certainly in the Philippines, the political party that I'm part of, Akbayan, for example, promoted local village level political processes anchored on community participation. Yeah, we tried to spread the lessons from that struggle in the Cordillera in different parts of the Philippines.
Thank you, Joel. I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Alex.
Larry, thanks, Joel. Yeah, I have one question, and then we'll hear from one of our respondents who's a part of spade work. Oh yeah, Scott, you got something?
Please.
Yeah. Do you wanna jump in now?
I think now is a good point to apropos of the impact of the campaign within the World Bank. I think it was a catalyzing element in the 80s, mid 80s, and when the World Bank there were a group of let's call them subversive anthropologists, in the sense that they wanted to change the operational directives, or what the World Bank uses as the rules of those who receive its countries that receive and projects that receive World Bank loans must follow operational directives that really were very ambiguous, if not non-existent, when this campaign against the Chico River dams gained momentum inside the bank. We're talking about maybe 84, 85. And by 88, they loaned to Mexico, that I had something to do with because I made a film about that as well, invited to do so by the bank and these subversive colleagues who were bank staffers, where the local communities actually had say in how they would be resettled, and compensation. There was a project in Chile offering a percentage of the business of the revenue from the hydroelectric dam, and the Pangue Dam in southern Chile would be distributed to a community foundation. All of this was more than rhetoric, and of course was not did not meet on the ground with community organizations that were capable of taking it a step further in terms of the local and regional political dynamics. So by 1995, there was no more discussion of equity participation of communities in hydro dam revenue streams, or the actual forcing governments and power commissions to design the inevitable resettlement and forced displacement mechanics, let's call them, given these extractive process, which is, we're talking about extracting value from dammed water, right? That's what a hydropower dam is. By 1995, I think that effort was exhausted, and has not been, because global financing today does not come from the majority from the World Bank or the international financial regional banks, but from private capital. So that was the end of the chapter, let's say. Back to you.
Thank you, Scott, for adding that. Yeah, my question for you, Joel, is, so we have folks who are kind of watching and following this conversation that are either thinking about getting into organizing, are new organizers, and some seasoned organizers. And I remember earlier in the conversation you mentioning a few of the organizing tactics that were used. For example, like the work being centered around community and political education. I'm wondering, obviously organizing in the Philippines would be very different than organizing in the States or in the US. So I'm wondering what organizing tactics were used that you felt would be helpful to share, that were unique, or could offer some insight into how we can think more creatively in how we're organizing, particularly directly impacted folks. I hope that question made sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think probably the experience of the KDP, how do you translate that? It's an organization set up by progressive Filipino Americans and Filipinos, immigrants to the US. They have very, very rich experience going back to the 60s and into the 70s and 80s. They published one book. They're working on, I think, working on another and convention. Francis has contacts with key people there, and I think for your the people participating in this seminar, their experience is most relevant. I mean, for example, they organized among Filipino workers. Okay, of course, logical. You're progressive. You organize workers, but they also knew that Filipinos got together during Philippine National Day. They would pick a park, bring food, have fun for a whole day. And the KDP got into this. It's not organizing national days, picnics. Does not sound like something really, you know, in progressive handbooks. But it was very, very useful, very important. They organized, well, actually we, since I was part of it, we organized nurses because Filipino nurses and other medical personnel constitute, I think, something like 15% of all medical personnel in the US. So that's it. Now, on the difference between organizing in the Philippines and the US, I have one story to tell. The National Democratic Front had a set of rules on the relationship of the sexes. Very strict, and actually, I think, stupid rules, but they had the rules. And one of the things that the rules say is no premarital sex. During one education session, I argued against these rules using Marx and Engels and so on. In other words, attacking it theoretically. And the course instructor said, yeah, but because the people that we work with are conservative, they're against premarital sex. And I said, well, that may be true in the rural areas of the Philippines, but in San Francisco, if you tell people that you prohibit premarital sex, you will get laughed out of the room. So context matters. Back to you, Alex.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. We're going to hear from DNA, who is a participant in spade work. I think DNA is going to share a reflection. Yeah, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. Not sure if you can hear me. Hi, everyone. My name's DNA, she, her, ella. I'm part of the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. We are statewide youth-led organization in California, but I am personally based in southern part of the state, the Inland Empire. If some of you are from California or have been out here. And I definitely wanted to share a little bit of what resonated in connection to the work we do. I think something that we're very grounded in the work that we're doing is like pushing for the closure of detention centers in the state of California, especially in rural communities where we know structures like detention centers and also take space, but also displace people and also place people in cages, right? So I think it resonated because I do see detention centers as colonized buildings that I think they come from like colonizers of incarcerating people and keeping people under control. And I think something that resonates more with the region that I come from, it's in addition to fighting against detention centers and the closure of them, because we believe in a better world without them, is also in our region the booming of warehouses and how it has also displaced many people. It keeps displacing people from being like rural land that could be nurtured and also allow for the nature and animals to live. I think they've been has been transforming and pushing people to work in jobs that oftentimes aren't leading anywhere and are extractive to our region. So I think I definitely resonated with the video showing how the landscape changing and how it pushed people, because I do see that playing a role now. And very appreciative of the like bridging the movement in the Philippines and the movement years back, and how it's something that now as a younger generation we're pushing for the end of it, because we do see as these buildings, whether it be warehouses, whether it be the dams that displace people, like they are colonized structure that do that are extractive to our world and kind of like take away from that extractive and commodification of animals, nature, and allow us to coexist rather than take control over the world. So I am very appreciative of that, and I can definitely see how we're pushing for that shift and see how we use land in a very holistic way rather than us getting profit out of it, right? Whether it be a detention center or warehouse, I think we want to push against that profit over care for the land, care for the people that have been here before us. So very appreciative of that. And thank you for Joel and both of the speakers today, because I was able to reconnect, but also connect with the history, not only here in the US, but in other countries.
Thank you, DNA. That's why we're doing this. This is really useful, for today's organizers. And I want to lift up something that Joel mentioned earlier, and we run into this all the time, right? When we talk about organizing training today, and mentioned it might not, the organizing of gatherings and grassroots things like picnics and things like that. You said might not be in the progressive playbook, but it was essential to build. And that's really, what organizers learn all the time is that to do the work that's sustainable, you have to build, really deep relationships with people on the ground, and even in alliance work, reaching out to nurses unions and others. That kind of work, that sustainable work is really essential if we're talking about long haul. Joel, I have a question from one of our audience members in the chat, and this is from Gina, who is wondering, since you mentioned the United States, Filipinos in the United States, what have been the opportunities and challenges of organizing from US Filipino movement formations, especially since you noted, Joel, kind of recommending a push for a settlement in the peace process. Gina imagines US Filipinos being more idealistic and maybe not wanting to settle. How do you suggest working out those tensions?
It's partly, well, mostly a matter of judgment. I mean, I was myself part of the National Democratic Front for 20 years. And although a lot of people think, because I am a writer, a lot of people think I must have been in the leadership of the National Democratic Front. I actually hold the record for being a candidate member who was not promoted to full member. I think it's 20 years as a candidate member, never promoted to full member. So my position on the negotiating process is the conditions for successful armed national liberation movements do not exist anymore. It doesn't exist for sure. It doesn't exist anymore in the Philippines. So, and then the very experience of the National Democratic Front is in fact that the most successful organizing efforts are not in their playbook. They organized legal political parties, acquired seats in the national parliament, and not only get money from that, they do most of their propaganda through these legal political parties, which are actually under threat now. The other thing that is important, I think, for organizers to understand is you make use of what resources you have. It's one way to put it is it's asymmetrical organizing. They have a lot more power than we do. But if we use our imagination, then we can get at them. Let me give you one example. This is in Berkeley, California. The USAID financed a year-long program for training Filipino mayors, city and municipal mayors. And the end of that year-long program was 1 month in Berkeley, California. Now, I mean, it's very hard to imagine how to counter this, but we did. I mean, for example, we found out that the secretary of the unit that was going to conduct the training was a Filipina. And so we talked to her and she agreed. In the folders of the mayors, when on the first day, they open their folders and the first thing they see are anti-Marcos leaflets. And then at the end of the month, they had a banquet at a fancy restaurant in Berkeley. And the way that we countered it is we had some special fortune cookies made. And in the middle of their dinner, this attractive young Filipino comes in with a basket full of fortune cookies, telling them that this was a gift from the Filipino community. And then when they opened the fortune cookies, lo and behold, anti-Marcos slogans again. Some of the mayors were so scared. They thought that we poisoned them. So it's use whatever resources you have at hand. We can't get to the point of being able to use the kinds of tools and resources that those who hold power have. Back to you, Larry.
I love that example. I'm going to ask maybe as a wrap-up question if you have another piece of advice for today's organizers, but use whatever resources you have at hand and be creative in your tactics. I love that fortune cookie story. Pass it over to Alex.
Yeah, I love that story too. We have, I think, just one more question from some participants, and I'm going to read it out. So the question is, as a person engaged in ideological work with left politics in the Philippines, how do you deal when communities demand things that you know will be a setback? And the example is like when communities ask for more police, when the solution of crime, or when the solution to crime is much deeper than that.
That's a question that I don't know the answer to. I think the key is if you have well, I mean, it's possible. Well, I don't really know the answer to that, because the situation with police and reform of police forces in the US is a very, very difficult question, especially given the experience of the Black Lives Matter. It's already been a year since what's his name, George Floyd, was killed, and the killings continue. But it's a very complex issue, one that has both local community, in other words, whatever positions you take has to do firstly with the local community, but also national level issues. I mean, for example, there should be pressure, I imagine there is, on the Biden administration to do something about the immunity that police forces tend to have against cases filed against them, and that's a national issue. So although I keep up with what's going on in the US, among other things, because I have family in the US, I cannot presume to give advice on specific organizational questions, especially on something as complex as the role of police. I mean, the role of police in the US is a very, very important issue. It's probably the cutting edge issue as far as American racism is concerned. But I can't resist telling another anecdote. Once, when Marcos visited the US, he made it a point to avoid San Francisco, knowing that the anti-dictatorship groups were quite strong in San Francisco. So he only stayed at the airport. So what we did is we had different people, and you know the paging system in the airport, we had different people asking to talk to Marcos Hitler Dictador Tuta. Paging Marcos Hitler Dictador Tuta. That's tiny little thing, but makes me happy. Back to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joel. Yeah, I do think the issue and the conversation around policing versus reform in the U.S. is a big one, And sort of what I heard out of that question that was raised from a participant is just the tension of trying to be connected and listen to and follow what community wants, and being in a tough spot where it sounds like community is asking for something that you know will cause more harm in the long term. But I do like the example that you shared of right there. You knew that there were certain folks that had that had conversations with certain folks and who didn't, and that feels like very connected to some tactics that I used back in organizing when I was with the People's Lobby, where we started to organize more in downstate Illinois. And the further you get away from Chicago, the more red the state is here. And I knew that I was not the person to be talking to rural white folks, right? So I wasn't the organizer that was sent out there to have those kind of conversations. So yeah, so thank you for sharing what you did. And I don't know, Larry, if you have a closing question, and then we'll start to transition. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks, Alex. And I do like those observations, and the observation again from the chat was sort of to echo that. What is the challenge that organizers, wherever you are, have when maybe something that your organizing goals are contrary to where people are in a popular setting? I mean, maybe, in the 90s, we talked about in the US context, how, like you had to fight against this notion that public safety was the number one goal and not police accountability. How do you balance those when you go into neighborhoods where maybe the crime rate is high? How do you deal with Filipinos who are maybe not pro Duterte, but maybe sympathetic to the notion of his anti-drug, war, or whatever, his war on drugs? So I think that's the tension organizers face a lot, and I think that was the spirit of that question. But I have a broader question for Joel, and DNA, was nice enough to kind of show off a little bit of our kind of the organizing cred we have here in the Spadework program. But we have a whole generation of young organizers who are coming up and learning from someone like you, Joel, with decades of experience in activism and organizing and education. What is it that sustains you? I guess the question is, what piece of advice or, words of wisdom might you have for today's organizers in kind of making sure they stay in the fight for the long haul?
When I think of that, I think of who are the people that I like, enjoy, respect the most. And when I try to make a list of those people, they happen to be all political activists. So, I mean, a lot of it it's not really inertia, it's a conscious decision to continue to be in touch with people whom I respect, and to therefore continue to be active together with them. The other thing is, if I actually retire, what am I going to do? Join church bingo sessions, participate in ballroom dancing? I mean, I enjoy activism. I enjoy the kind of work I've been doing for the last 50 years of my life. I guess if I have to think, I have to squeeze advice out of it. We have an expression in the underground in the Philippines of being being GD, being grim and determined. I never really liked that. I think in the end, we are all fighting for a society where people can develop, and where people can enjoy themselves and have fun. How are you going to fight for a society where people enjoy themselves and have fun if in the course of fighting for it, you don't have fun? So in the kind of organizing that we do, we should defend spaces where we can have fun. Back to you, Larry.
I love that piece of advice. We have a lot of serious people, and seriousness is not always the most sustainable characteristic. Although I think if we're talking about organizing for a world where we can still have fun, we should apologize to the Ballroom Dancers Association, who are part of our audience. No. I appreciate that. So I want to really thank Joel Rocamora again today for his wonderful recollection of this struggle, his insights, his lessons, and also to our other very special guest, Scott Robinson, for his insights into that film, and that great story about taking the film to Havana. I'm going to ask Alex now to offer up a quick word from our sponsor, and then we're going to kind of close this up with a preview of next week. But again, thank you very much to Joel and to Scott very much.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And thank you again, Joel. And thank you, Scott, for joining us and sharing in this conversation. If you all were inspired by this session and want to keep it going, then please go to the link in your chat. It should pop in right now and make a donation. Your contribution will go to the development of organizers through Spadework. Spadework is a national organizer training program to nurture the next generation of organizers of color. Today we had DNA share with us. DNA is a participant in the first cohort of organizers in Spadework. And I'm going to give it back to you, Larry, to tell us a little bit about the next session.
Yeah, thank you again, Alex. And I want to make sure we thank also our great interpretation team of Ale and Abraham, and to of course, our tech guru, Matt, of course, to our global audience today. We appreciate everyone with us today. We want to just remind folks that we move on to next Monday, back to our normal time. And Monday will feature episode 7. It's a story about urban poor organizing in Ecuador. So that's going to be really great next Monday at our usual time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then we get into the UFW Grape Boycott. We have an open session still for week 9, which is sort of a surprise session. And then we close up with week 10. But I just want to make sure everyone is aware that we continue the work of the Freedom School, and we appreciate all of our guests today. Thank you so much to everyone. We appreciate our audience. Just want to say thank you, and to all of you, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next Monday. Take care.